My annoying vegan daughter stormed into the steakhouse I work at, screaming I was an animal murderer. She got me in trouble at work, so I sent her to live with my meat-eating grandparents on their farm. My daughter has turned vegan about 6 months ago, and she has made it her mission to shove it down everyone's throats. The thing is, my wife and I have genuinely tried our best to accommodate it and have gone as far as having a vegan family dinner night twice a week, buying vegan groceries for her. And for her birthday, we went to a vegan restaurant. We have also tried learning about veganism, and my wife has tried going vegan, but it wasn't for her. Personally, I can support the cause, but this lifestyle just isn't for me. I love steak too much, but the problem seems to be that my daughter is incapable of understanding that we do not want to be vegan. If my wife and I are eating meat or dairy, our daughter will take her plate of food and eat upstairs. She also refuses to speak to us for the duration of the day if she sees us cooking something non-vegan. We have even had to buy her a spare fridge to keep vegan products in because she claims she will not keep her healthy, cruelty-free food alongside the disgusting murder meat. She will not stay in the same room as us if we are eating meat, meaning we only eat as a family twice a week on vegan dinner night. She is also very vocal about how great veganism is and what cruel animal colors my wife and I are. We have tried to talk to her a few times gently about her behavior, but each time she says she just cared about animals. The main argument my daughter and I are having right now is the fact that I work in a steakhouse, and she let me know this was a problem very early on in her vegan journey. I told her I was sorry, but I had been working in that steakhouse for a decade and have built up a very secure job with pretty good financial stability. I also absolutely love steak, and every now and again my job will allow me to bring home a steak at the end of the day for dinner. My daughter has seen me enjoy this steak many times, and it drives her crazy each time. Well, about 2 weeks ago, I brought home a steak and was having it with dinner, and my daughter, upon seeing it, said the next time I do this, she will boycott the restaurant. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but she went upstairs not saying anything else. I honestly forgot that conversation even happened, and 2 days ago, I brought home steak again. My daughter didn't say anything, but it's now clear she was planning something. The very next day, which was yesterday, she stormed into the restaurant with a huge sign demanding to shut down this steakhouse for animal cruelty. When the manager tried to tell her to leave, she started recording the entire thing and called out specifically for me, telling me she is ashamed of me for supporting the culling of animals. She stayed in the restaurant for about 20 minutes, screaming and yelling about animal cruelty and how veganism is the way forward, distracting the customers, which led to a few of them leaving. I was reprimanded heavily in the office after this and was told if another incident like that happens, I will be fired. I was so embarrassed, even ashamed of my own daughter, but mostly angry. I came home and got into a huge argument with her about it, calling her disrespectful and entitled and that she could have gotten me fired. She retorted back saying that maybe I should get fired from that slaughterhouse. I told her that the slaughterhouse is what puts food on the table for her. We ended up getting nowhere with the conversation, but when dinner came around, it happened to be family vegan night. My daughter came down excited for the food, not paying any attention to our interaction earlier and acting like nothing was wrong. She was very, very surprised to see an 8-ounce steak on all of our plates, including hers. So upon coming downstairs and seeing a juicy and mouth-watering 8-ounce ribeye steak, cooked to medium rare perfection, my daughter asked me what this was. My wife and I responded that this was just a little replacement for family vegan dinner night, as we all thought it would be best for her to learn that respect goes both ways. We told her that she will show us the respect we have shown her and respect our choices. She did not take this lightly, however, and when I held the plate with the steak out for her, she literally backed away and gasped, like she had just seen a ghost. I told her to come around and eat the steak. I told her that this steak was good and the cow did not die in vain. She ended up screaming how we are awful human beings and whipped her phone out to take pictures of my wife and I eating steak, acting like we are some criminals. My wife and I did not hesitate to pose for the camera, however, which made my daughter very angry as she asked us how we could eat our own. My wife then made a joke, saying, "Are you calling me a cow? Don't be fat-phobic, darling." I chimed in with, "The only thing that's fat here is this steak. Look at how thick it is. It's too good, you should really try some." My wife and I's sarcastic ways were getting on our daughter's nerves way too much by this point, and seeing us make fun of the cause she was fighting for made her go berserk. She broke down and started crying, and my wife was going to go and comfort her. But before she could even stand up from her seat, our daughter went into a rage and opened our fridge. She put on some gloves and started removing every single meat and dairy product and started throwing it in the bin. When she started doing this, my wife grabbed her hands and got her to stop. And at this action, our daughter tried to literally bite my wife's hand. I felt perplexed watching this because I wanted to physically restrain her, but I could not bring myself to use any sort of force against my daughter. I opted to go over and instead just hug my daughter as tight as I could, making it so she couldn't do much except hug me back. She tried to claw at me, but I wouldn't let go, and she ended up calming down after a few minutes. When I pulled back, I could see the tears rolling down her cheeks. and I asked her to talk privately for a moment. She said yes, and we went for a walk. During this walk, we discussed everything about her veganism and why she acts so extreme. She ended up telling me that she just really wants a vegan family, and that her best friend is also vegan, and she ended up managing to convert her entire family into veganism, so she wanted to do the same. She just had no idea how to go about it. I told her that I was sorry, but there was no way we were going to do that, and she was going to have to accept it. She ended up saying she was not okay with this and that she is passionate about veganism. She can't see herself living with people who are not vegan and who endorse animal cruelty. The thing is, no amount of trying to convince her that my wife and I do not support animal cruelty got through to her, and a few days later, after seeing my wife and I eating a steak yet again, she asked to move out, despite only being 16. So my wife and I are sending her to my grandparents. We told our Jenna they were vegan. They're absolutely not. And she was thrilled to go live with like-minded people. My grandparents, Grandpa Pete and Grandma Martha, live on a small working farm in rural Wisconsin. They raise chickens, have a couple of cows, and Grandpa Pete still hunts deer every fall. They're the furthest thing from vegan you could imagine. They make their own butter, collect eggs daily, and Grandma Martha's famous venison stew is a family tradition during the holidays. I called them to explain the situation, and they agreed to take Jenna for the summer, thinking it might be good for her to see where food actually comes from. They promised to be gentle with her but honest about their lifestyle. They saw it as an opportunity to help Jenna understand the reality of food production and potentially develop a more balanced perspective. We drove Jenna to the farm last weekend. The 5-hour drive was actually pleasant since Jenna was excited about going to live with fellow vegans. She chatted happily the whole way, making plans for all the vegan cooking she would learn and how she might even start a garden with my grandparents. I felt a little guilty about the deception, but honestly, after the steakhouse incident, I was at my wit's end. When we arrived, my grandparents greeted us warmly. Grandpa Pete was wearing his usual flannel shirt with a fishing hook pin on the collar. Grandma Martha had just finished baking what I knew was her famous buttermilk biscuits, but she cleverly didn't mention the ingredients when offering them. The farmhouse smelled like it always did. A comforting mix of fresh bread, simmering soup, and the faint, earthy scent that comes from living close to the land. Jenna was at all smiles as she hugged them both. Dad says you guys are vegan too. I'm so excited to learn your recipes. My grandparents exchanged a quick glance, but played along. We've got lots to teach you about food, Grandma Martha said carefully. I helped bring daughter's bags to the guest room while Sandra chatted with my grandparents in the kitchen. The room overlooked the chicken coop, but the chickens were in their hen house for the evening, so my daughter, Jenna, didn't notice. I figured she'd discover the truth soon enough, but I hoped by then she'd be settled in and maybe learn something. As we were saying our goodbyes, my daughter Jenna was practically bouncing with excitement. This is going to be the best summer ever. Finally, I'll be with people who understand. I hugged her and said, just keep an open mind while you're here, okay? She rolled her eyes. Unlike you and Mom, I already have an open mind. On the drive back home, Sandra expressed doubts about our plan. Do you think this is really going to work? She's going to freak out when she realizes they're not vegan? I shrugged. Maybe, but my grandparents are smart and patient. They won't push her, but they'll give her a reality check about where food comes from. Plus, they're far enough away that she can't just storm home when she's upset. When we got home that night, the house felt weirdly quiet without Jenna's constant veganism lectures. We made bacon and eggs for dinner just because we could, without having to hear about pig intelligence or chicken periods. Grandpa Pete called the next morning. Apparently Jenna had woken up to the sound of roosters crowing and had gone to the window to discover the chicken coop. She'd come downstairs demanding explanations. She's pretty upset, Grandpa Pete said. But we told her that we respect all animals here, even the ones we eat, and that everything on our farm is ethically raised. She didn't storm off, which I consider progress. I felt relieved that at least she hadn't tried to flee immediately. Just give her time, I told him. And thanks again for doing this. 2 days later, I got a text from Jenna. I know what you did. This isn't over. Then radio silence. Meanwhile, things at work calmed down. Marcus seemed to have moved past the protest incident, and customers had stopped asking about that crazy vegan girl. I was just starting to relax when I got a call from Grandma Martha a week into Jenna's stay. You might want to sit down for this, she said, and my stomach immediately nodded. What happened? I asked, bracing for the worst. Well, Jenna tried to free the chickens last night. I groaned. How many got out? All 23 of them. But that's not the interesting part, Grandma Martha continued. When the neighbor's dog came running into the yard after the chickens, Jenna panicked and started herding them back into the coop to protect them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She put them back, every last one, and then she stood guard with a broom until your grandfather chased the dog away. Grandma Martha chuckled. She was in tears afterward, saying she didn't realize how dangerous it was for them outside the coop. It was a small victory, but it gave me hope. Maybe this summer on the farm would help Jenna understand the complexity of our relationship with animals rather than seeing everything in black and white. That hope was short-lived. The next day, Grandpa Pete called to tell me Jenna had contacted her friend Taylor, who was organizing an online campaign against my grandparents' farm. They had already received several angry messages on their farm's Facebook page, and someone had left a negative review calling them animal abusers. Grandpa Pete wasn't angry, just concerned. She's a teenager with strong convictions. I respect that, but she needs to understand there are consequences to actions like this. I promised I would talk to her. When I called Jenna, she refused to speak to me at first, but eventually took the phone from my grandmother. "You lied to me," she said immediately. "I did," I admitted, "but only because you weren't willing to listen or compromise. Attacking Grandma Martha and Grandpa Pete online isn't okay, Jenna. They've done nothing but open their home to you." "They kill animals," she hissed. "They raise animals with care and respect," I countered. "Have you even bothered to learn about their farming practices, or are you just assuming the worst because it fits your narrative?" I could tell Jenna was fuming on the other end of the line. The silence stretched out uncomfortably before she finally spoke. "Fine, I'll call Taylor and ask her to stop the online campaign," she muttered, her voice tight with barely contained frustration. "Thank you," I said, trying not to sound too relieved. "Just give the farm a chance, okay? That's all I'm asking." She hung up without saying goodbye, the abrupt disconnect emphasizing her anger. I sighed heavily, rubbing my temples before calling my grandparents back to let them know Jenna would hopefully be calling off her friend. Grandma Martha sounded optimistic, her voice carrying that characteristic warmth that had always comforted me as a child. "Don't worry too much," she said. "Your grandfather has been taking her around the farm this morning. She might be coming around, little by little. You know how teenagers are. They need time to adjust to new ideas." I wasn't convinced, but thanked them again for their patience with my difficult daughter. When I told Sandra about the chicken escape in the online campaign, she looked worried, her forehead creasing in that way it always did when she was truly concerned. "Maybe this wasn't such a good idea, she said, pacing our kitchen. "What if she tries something worse next time? Your grandparents are in their 70s. They shouldn't have to deal with this kind of stress." I shook my head firmly. "My grandparents can handle it. They raised me, remember? And I was no picnic as a teenager either." The memory of my own rebellious years gave me a strange sense of karmic justice now that I was dealing with Jenna. Sandra raised an eyebrow skeptically. "You weren't trying to liberate livestock." "No, but I did throw all of Grandpa Pete's fishing gear into the pond once after watching Free Willy," I admitted with a sheepish smile. Sandra burst out laughing, which helped ease some of the tension that had been filling our home since this whole situation began. The next week passed without incident. I checked in with my grandparents daily, and they reported that while Jenna was still standoffish, she had stopped actively trying to sabotage farm operations. In fact, Grandpa Pete mentioned that she'd started helping Grandma Martha in the garden, focusing on the vegetables and avoiding anything to do with the animals. It was a small step, but I allowed myself to feel cautiously hopeful. Then came the call I'd been dreading. It was Grandma Martha, and she sounded frazzled, her usually calm voice now high with anxiety. "Jenna's gone," she said without preamble. My heart dropped like a stone. "What? What do you mean, gone?" I felt my chest tighten as worst-case scenarios immediately flooded my mind. "She's not in the house. Pete found her bed empty at Nice's. Boss saw you opening eyes dead and that another that her backpack is missing. We've looked all over the property. She's nowhere to be found." I immediately thought of the worst scenarios. Jenna alone on the highway trying to hitchhike, or lost in the woods surrounding the farm. Images of news stories about missing teenagers flashed through my mind. "Have you called the police?" I asked, already grabbing my car keys from the hook by the door. "Not yet," Grandma Martha said, her voice steadying somewhat. "We found a note saying she's staying with her friend Taylor's cousin, who apparently lives about 20 miles from here. She left a phone number. We're hoping she's actually there and safe." I was simultaneously relieved and furious. The knot in my stomach loosened slightly, but my anger flared. "Did you call the number?" "Yes, but no answer. Grandpa Pete's driving around looking for her now. He's checking the bus station and Taylor's cousin's place, based on the address we found online. I told Grandma Martha I'd leave work immediately and drive up to help search." After explaining the situation to Marcus, who was surprisingly understanding given the previous drama, I rushed home to pack an overnight bag. Sandra decided to come with me, and we were on the road within an hour, the radio silent as we both sat lost in worried thoughts. During the 5-hour drive, I tried calling the number Jenna had left multiple times. It went straight to voicemail each time, increasing my frustration and concern with every unsuccessful attempt. I also called Taylor's parents, who seemed genuinely surprised and concerned when I explained the situation. They confirmed that Taylor did have a cousin in Wisconsin, but didn't have contact information. They promised to reach out to their extended family and get back to me as soon as possible. "She'll be okay," Sandra kept saying, though I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "She's smart, even if she's being incredibly foolish right now." When we finally arrived at the farm, Grandpa Pete had just returned from his search empty-handed. He looked exhausted, his normally robust frame seeming smaller as he slumped into his favorite armchair, the worn leather creaking beneath him. "I checked the bus station and asked around town," he said, running a weathered hand through his thinning white hair. "No one's seen her. I drove by the address we found for Taylor's cousin, but no one answered the door." Just as we were discussing whether to call the police, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number with the local area code. I answered immediately, my heart pounding. "Hello?" Mr. Davis? A young woman's voice asked. This is Amanda, Taylor's cousin. Jenna is here with me. The relief was overwhelming, washing through me like a physical sensation. Is she okay? She's fine. She's just, very upset about the farm situation. She showed up on my doorstep this morning, talking about animal rights and exploitation. There was a hint of discomfort in Amanda's voice, suggesting she hadn't expected to be involved in a family dispute. I managed to keep my composure despite wanting to rant about irresponsible teenagers. May I speak with her, please? There was some muffled conversation, and then Jenna came on the line, her voice defensive and challenging. I'm not coming back to the farm, she stated flatly. Jenna, you can't just run away when things don't go your way, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the churning mix of relief and anger I was feeling. That was incredibly dangerous and irresponsible. Do you have any idea how worried your great-grandparents have been? How worried we've been? It's not irresponsible to refuse to participate in animal exploitation, she shot back, that self-righteous tone I'd grown too familiar with lately creeping into her voice. I left a note. I'm safe. I'm not coming back to watch animals being raised for slaughter. I took a deep breath, counting silently to 10 before responding. We'll discuss that later. Right now, I need to come pick you up. Your mom and I are already at the farm. After some back and forth, with Jenna arguing and me trying to remain calm while Sandra whispered suggestions in my ear, Amanda finally gave me her address. She sounded uncomfortable about the whole situation, which gave me hope that she might be a somewhat responsible adult, despite harboring my runaway daughter. Sandra and I drove to the address, which turned out to be a small apartment above a health food store in a nearby town. Amanda, a woman in her mid-20s with dreadlocks and multiple piercings, answered the door looking apologetic, her eyes darting nervously between us. I'm really sorry, she said quietly as she let us inside. Taylor called me freaking out about Jenna being on some meat farm against her will. I didn't realize she had run away from her great-grandparents. I would never have let her stay if I'd known the whole story. Jenna was sitting on the couch, arms crossed tightly across her chest. She had that stubborn look I'd come to know all too well. Chin jutted forward, eyes narrowed, lips pressed in a thin line. What were you thinking? I asked her, keeping my voice controlled but serious. Do you have any idea how worried everyone was? Grandpa Pete has been driving all over looking for you for hours. I left a note, she muttered, looking down at her combat boots. A note, I repeated incredulously. You're 16. You can't just decide to leave when things get uncomfortable. That's not how life works. I'm not going back there, she insisted, finally meeting my gaze with defiance blazing in her eyes. They kill animals. They raise them just to kill them. It's cruel, and I won't be part of it. Sandra stepped in, her voice gentler than mine. Jenna, running away doesn't solve anything. It just creates more problems. Your great-grandparents care about you, and they were terrified something had happened to you. After a lengthy discussion that involved a lot of teenage eye-rolling, dramatic sighs, and tense negotiations, we agreed to get a hotel room for the night instead of returning to the farm immediately. I hoped that giving Jenna some space might make her more willing to talk rationally in the morning, after we'd all had some time to cool down. At the hotel, Sandra and I took turns trying to reason with our daughter. I explained that while we respected her veganism, she needed to respect that others made different choices. Sandra pointed out that my grandparents treated their animals ethically, unlike the factory farms Jenna watched documentaries about. They had space to roam, proper care, and were treated humanely throughout their lives. But they still kill them in the end, Jenna said, tears welling up in her eyes. How is that ethical? They pretend to care about the animals, but they're just raising them to be slaughtered. That's even worse. It's betrayal. I didn't have a perfect answer for that. Life is complicated, Jenna. There's no perfect way to exist in this world without causing some harm. Even plant agriculture causes animal deaths through habitat destruction and pest control. The combines that harvest grain and vegetables kill countless small animals. She looked unconvinced, but at least she was listening, her arms uncrossed for the first time since we found her. That's different, she argued, but with less certainty than before. That's not intentional. It's not the purpose. I know it seems black and white to you right now, Sandra said gently, but most ethical questions exist in shades of gray. Your great-grandparents' farm is nothing like the industrial operations in those documentaries you watch. The next morning we had breakfast at a cafe that, to Jenna's surprise, had several vegan options. The atmosphere was less tense as we sat by a window overlooking the small town, morning sunlight streaming across our table. As we ate, I proposed a compromise. How about this? I suggested. You come back to the farm, but you don't have to participate in anything involving the animals. You can focus on the vegetable garden, which Grandma Martha says you've been enjoying, and will respect your veganism. No more comments about protein or trying to get you to try the eggs. Jenna pushed her tofu scramble around her plate, considering the offer. And, what about when they kill the chickens? Am I supposed to just ignore that? They won't do that while you're there, I promised, though I wasn't entirely sure if that was true. I'd have to talk to my grandparents. And remember, this is just for the summer. You can handle anything for a few weeks. After much persuasion, Jenna reluctantly agreed to return to the farm under these conditions. When we arrived, my grandparents were understanding, if a bit hurt by Jenna's extreme reaction. Grandpa Pete, especially, seemed wounded by the implication that what he'd done his entire life was cruel. We've been farming this way for over 50 years, Grandpa Pete told her, his voice gruff but kind. We respect your different values, but we'd appreciate the same respect in return. We don't force our ways on you, and we'd hope for the same courtesy. Jenna nodded stiffly. The tension was thick, but at least she was willing to stay. I could see her struggle with her principles versus her position as a guest in their home. That night, before Sandra and I headed back home, I had a private conversation with my grandparents about how to handle the situation moving forward. We sat at their kitchen table, the same one where I'd eaten countless meals as a child, sipping tea from the mismatched mugs Grandma Martha had collected over decades. Just be yourselves, I advised. She needs to see that you can care deeply for animals even if you also use them for food, and maybe avoid any processing while she's here. Let her see the day-to-day reality of farm life without the parts she finds most objectionable. Grandma Martha nodded, her silver hair catching the kitchen light. We can do that, and I'll focus on teaching her about the garden. Did you know she's actually got quite a green thumb? She's been germinating heirloom tomato seeds and asking all sorts of questions about organic growing methods. This small positive note gave me hope as Sandra and I drove back home the next day. For the next 2 weeks, things seemed to stabilize. My grandparents reported that Jenna was still standoffish, but was spending hours in the garden and had even started learning to can vegetables with Grandma Martha. She seemed to find satisfaction in the tactile, productive work of growing and preserving food. Then came the watershed moment. Grandpa Pete called me one evening, sounding oddly proud, his voice animated in a way I hadn't heard since this ordeal began. One of our hens was being attacked by a fox this morning, he said. Jenna saw it happening from the kitchen window and ran out there with the garden hoe, yelling and swinging to scare the fox off. Never seen someone move so fast. I sat up straighter, surprised. Really? Is the chicken okay? Got a few feathers pulled out, but she'll be fine. Here's the interesting part. Afterward, Jenna asked me if that's why we keep the chickens in the coop, and I explained the whole predator situation. We had a good talk about protection versus imprisonment. I think she's starting to see some nuance. This was the first breakthrough, but not the last. A week later, Grandma Martha called to tell me Jenna had asked to learn more about the vegetable rotation system and why they planted certain crops together. She was genuinely interested in how the farm worked as an ecosystem, how the chickens' manure enriched the soil, and how certain plants protected others from pests naturally. She's still vegan, Grandma Martha clarified. Makes her own meals separate from ours, but she stopped giving us death glares when we eat eggs. And yesterday she actually asked me questions about my knitting, wanted to know if the wool came from our neighbor's sheep. Progress was slow but steady. By mid-July, Jenna was helping with more farm chores, including collecting eggs, though she made it clear she was rescuing them, not harvesting them for consumption. She'd even named all the chickens and spent time talking to them, which Grandpa Pete found amusing but endearing. He told me she'd joke about checking them chatting with the ladies before heading out to the coop each morning. The real test came when one of the cows, Bessie, developed a serious infection. The vet had to be called, and Jenna watched anxiously as Grandpa Pete and the vet worked together to treat the animal. She stayed by the cow's side for hours, helping to administer medication and offering comfort to the distressed animal. She asked a million questions, Grandpa Pete reported later, about how we care for the animals when they're sick, how much the vet costs, whether we'd still get rid of Bessie if she couldn't produce milk anymore. She seemed surprised by how much we invest in veterinary care. What did you tell her? I asked, curious about how he'd navigated this potential minefield. The truth, that Bessie will live out her days here regardless because she's part of the farm family. Grandma Martha hasn't had the heart to cull an old dairy cow in 30 years. We just let them retire to the back pasture. I showed Jenna old Matilda. She's 12 now and hasn't given milk in 3 years, but she's still grazing happily. This revelation seemed to have a profound effect on Jenna. She started asking more questions about how the farm worked, the economics of small-scale farming, and why my grandparents made the choices they did. Rather than simply condemning, she was trying to understand. I could hear the shift in her voice during our phone calls. Less absolutism, more curiosity. By August, something remarkable happened. Jenna called us one evening, sounding thoughtful and reflective, her voice lacking the defensive edge I'd grown accustomed to. I've been thinking a lot about food systems, she said without preamble. I'm still vegan, and I still think it's the best choice for me. But I've realized that Grandma Martha and Grandpa Pete's farm is different from what I saw in those documentaries. Different how? I asked cautiously, not wanting to say anything that might make her retreat into her previous rigid stance. Well, the animals here have good lives. They have space and care and attention. It's not like those horrible factory farms. And Grandma Martha and Grandpa Pete use every part of what they produce. They don't waste anything. She paused, and I could almost hear her organizing her thoughts. I still don't want to eat animals, but I guess I understand their way better now. It's not as black and white as I thought. It wasn't a complete conversion, but it was a huge shift from her previous black and white thinking. I felt a surge of gratitude toward my grandparents and their patient approach. They hadn't tried to change her mind directly. They'd simply lived their values and allowed her to observe. The summer was coming to an end, and we needed to decide about the next school year. Sandra and I drove up to the farm again to discuss the options with Jenna and my grandparents. The farm looked different now, more vibrant somehow, with expanded vegetable beds that Jenna had helped create. To my surprise, Jenna asked if she could stay at the farm until Christmas. Grandma Martha's teaching me about preserving food for winter, and Grandpa Pete said I could expand the vegetable garden next spring if I wanted to. She explained, her eyes bright with enthusiasm I hadn't seen in months. I can do online school, please. I'm learning so much here. My grandparents were amenable to the idea. She's good company, Grandma Martha said, patting Jenna's hand affectionately. And she's teaching us some interesting vegan recipes. Did you know you can make cheese from cashews? It's actually not bad. We agreed to let Jenna stay with regular visits from us and the understanding that she would return home for holidays. As we were leaving, Jenna gave me a genuine hug for the first time in months, her thin arms squeezing tight around my waist. I'm still mad you lied about them being vegan, she whispered, but I'm kind of glad I ended up here. Back at home, Sandra and I adjusted to our quieter house. We still ate meat, but I found myself bringing home steaks less often, not because I felt guilty, but because I'd gained a new appreciation for the source of my food through Jenna's experience. When I did buy meat, I started checking labels more carefully, looking for indications of how the animals were raised. About a month later, I was at work when Marcus called me into his office again. My stomach clenched, remembering the last time this had happened, Jenna's protest still fresh in everyone's memory. "You've got a visitor," he said, looking puzzled rather than angry. In the office was Taylor, Jenna's militant vegan friend. She looked uncomfortable, twisting the strap of her purse in her hands, her usual confident demeanor nowhere to be seen. Hi, Mr. Davis," she said. "I wanted to apologize for helping with that protest thing. Jenna and I have been talking, and she told me about her great-grandparents' farm. It sounds different from what I expected." I was stunned. "Thank you, Taylor. That's very mature of you." She nodded, her gaze meeting mine briefly before darting away. "Jenna said they treat the animals with respect, and she said I should see where my food comes from too, instead of just watching videos online. So I was wondering, could I maybe visit her at the farm sometime?" This was an unexpected turn. "I think that could be arranged. I'm sure my grandparents would be happy to have you." After Taylor left, Marcus looked at me with raised eyebrows. "What exactly is happening at this farm of yours? Vegan conversion therapy?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Just some education about where food really comes from, both animal and plant. It's hard to maintain a black and white view when you see the actual complexity up close." The next big surprise came in October. I received a package from Jenna containing jars of homemade tomato sauce, pickled vegetables, and a letter. The vegetables had been grown in the garden she helped tend, and she'd preserved them herself under Grandma Martha's guidance. The jars were neatly labeled in Jenna's handwriting, with dates and ingredients carefully noted. "I'm proud of growing my own food," she wrote. "It feels good to know exactly where it comes from and the work that goes into it. I've been thinking that maybe, instead of protesting steakhouses, I should be promoting small, ethical farms like Grandma Martha and Grandpa Pete's. Not everyone will go vegan, but more people might care about where their meat comes from if they understood the difference." This was a profound shift in perspective. Instead of viewing all animal agriculture as evil, Jenna was starting to see the spectrum of practices and focusing on what she could realistically change. The militant absolutism had given way to a more practical, nuanced approach to advocacy. In November, I visited the farm again and was amazed by the transformation in Jenna. She was confident and knowledgeable about the garden, showing me the winter crops she'd planted and explaining the composting system she'd helped improve. She still prepared her own vegan meals, but now she did so alongside Grandma Martha, the two of them chatting comfortably as they worked in the kitchen. "Grandpa Pete's teaching me about the economics of farming," she told me over dinner. "Did you know how hard it is for small farms to compete with big agricultural companies? The profit margins are really small." I hadn't known she had any interest in the business side of farming. "It's tough," I agreed. "That's why so many family farms have disappeared." "Yeah," she said thoughtfully, twirling her fork in a plate of roasted vegetables. "And then, all we have left are those big factory farms that are actually terrible for animals. It's like by trying to boycott all animal products, I might actually be making things worse by hurting the good farms, too." This level of nuanced thinking was miles away from her previous absolutist stance. I glanced at my grandparents, who were beaming with quiet pride. That evening, As Jenna was showing me her plans for the spring garden, she asked a question that caught me off guard. Dad, do you think I overreacted about your job at the steakhouse? I chose my words carefully. I think you felt very strongly about your values, which isn't a bad thing. But yes, I think you took it too far by protesting at my workplace. She nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that. I was so focused on being right that I didn't consider how it would affect you. That wasn't fair. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get, and I appreciated it. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. When Thanksgiving approached, we had a family discussion about the holiday meal. Traditionally, turkey was the centerpiece of our celebration, but with Jenna's veganism, we needed to find a compromise. To my surprise, it was Jenna who proposed the solution. What if we get a locally raised, ethically produced turkey, but also have several vegan dishes that everyone can enjoy? I can make them with Grandma Martha. Sandra looked at me, eyebrows raised. That sounds reasonable. Are you sure you're okay with us having turkey, Jenna? I won't eat it, she said firmly, but I understand now that my way of eating isn't the only ethical way. It's more important where the food comes from and how it was raised. On Thanksgiving Day, our table was an unusual but harmonious mix. There was a small heritage turkey from a local farm, alongside a colorful array of vegan dishes that Jenna and Grandma Martha had prepared together. Jenna had even made a vegan pumpkin pie that turned out surprisingly delicious. As we sat around the table, I looked at my daughter with pride. She was still vegan, still passionate about animal welfare, but she had developed a more nuanced understanding of food systems and a respect for different approaches to ethical eating. Grandpa Pete raised his glass in a toast to understanding where our food comes from and respecting the many hands that produce it. We all clinked glasses, including Jenna, who added, and to making conscious choices about what we eat, whatever those choices might be. After the meal, as Sandra and I were doing dishes, she nudged me. Your plan kinda worked, huh? She's still vegan, but a much more reasonable one. I nodded, rinsing a plate thoughtfully. I think she needed to see the complexity firsthand. Videos and social media can make everything seem black and white. December brought more progress. Jenna asked if we could purchase a small greenhouse for the backyard at home so she could continue growing some of her own food. She'd developed a real passion for gardening and wanted to bring that back with her when she returned after Christmas. And maybe we can find a local farm for eggs and dairy, she suggested. For you guys? Not for me, but somewhere the animals are treated well, like at Grandma Martha and Grandpa Pete's. I was touched by her consideration. I think that's a great idea. The final test came a week before Christmas, when Jenna accompanied Grandpa Pete to the farmer's market to sell some of their preserved vegetables and eggs. She helped set up the stand and interacted with customers, proudly explaining the sustainable practices used on the farm. When they returned, Grandpa Pete couldn't stop grinning. You should have seen her talking to people about responsible farming. A customer asked why our eggs were more expensive than supermarket ones, and Jenna gave this whole eloquent explanation about the real cost of food production. Jenna blushed, but looked pleased. I just told them the truth about how the chickens live and why that matters. As Christmas approached, Jenna packed up her things to come home. She'd spent nearly 6 months at the farm, arriving as a militant vegan zealot and leaving as a thoughtful advocate for sustainable food systems. She was still vegan, but her perspective had expanded enormously. On her last morning at the farm, Grandpa Pete presented her with a gift, a custom-made sign for her future garden that read, Jenna's Ethical Eats. She hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. The drive home was filled with Jenna's excited plans for her greenhouse and garden. She also had ideas about starting a blog focused on ethical food sourcing, whether vegan or omnivorous. I want to build bridges instead of just yelling at people, she explained. That doesn't work anyway. Nobody listened when I was protesting at the steakhouse. I felt an overwhelming relief that my daughter had found a more constructive outlet for her passion. As we pulled into our driveway, I remembered the angry, self-righteous teenager who had stormed into my workplace 6 months ago and marveled at the thoughtful young woman beside me now. That night, as we sat down to dinner, there was no drama, no storming off, no accusations of murder, just a family eating together, Sandra and I with our chicken, Jenna with her lentil loaf, and having a normal conversation. It wasn't perfect harmony, but it was mutual respect, and after the year we'd had, that felt like a miracle.